Alright, so after playing through majority of the Splatfest and getting to play around with different kinds of weapons and getting through my first impressions about like the possible good weapons, subs, specials, I wanted to make like this video that what weapons would be meta defining and what would be other good choices and possibly like weapons that could even be good as the game comes out. So this is basically going to be the first impressions of this. Of course, there's going to be weapons that could be tested, and I'm going to be ranking the weapons that are already going to be assumed to be really good, or either really bad, or just need like some kind of like buffs. And yeah, basically meta defining is just going to be the tier, or that's going to be weapons that are simply the best and could be instant picks under most cases, or you need just one into your team, or just an alternative to it. And usually the strong, good choices are basically the type of weapons that will fit into this kind of like comps, as well as niche, and somewhat weak are the types of weapons that like you may want to question if you want to actually use them, or they just need more knowledge whether they will be actually good or not. And of course the weak and outclassed weapons will be the type of weapons that need either buffs or some kind of like their kits don't really function that well. Anyway, to start us off, there is the Zap. It's a meta defining weapon. Its tactical lure is one of the most busted specials the game has. It gives you mobility, it gives you quick respawn, it gives you a quick super jump, it gives you special saver, it gives you basically every buff you might want from a support. It's basically gonna keep pressure on and keep your specials intact, so there's really no reason to not have at least one tactical lure in your team when the game comes out. It's very hard to not justify using it. Like, its only downside is that you have to go and pick it up when you end up placing it. And the fact is that the entire tactical lure is also indestructible. And the weapon itself is also a good kit. You have the suction bomb into the Zap, so it makes it a very effective kit overall. Besides like the special, this whole it's super effective. And on top of that, the weapon itself feels so comfortable because it's so fast, and the entire kit is actually absolutely bonkers. There's no other weapon in the game that will actually like be as dumb as this, because you can also stack a second one onto your team. But my assumption to this is that they might not actually be that effective, and just the single one is going to be effective. But because of tactical lure, you might actually see some kind of like rush meta coming at the start of the game. So yeah. So as the second weapon, the most basic kit is going to be like Splattershot. Splattershot is a really good weapon overall, and it's going to be a very powerful weapon. The special itself lasts quite a short amount of time, but it's very effective in what it does. And the kit itself is very basic too. It has a bomb, it is a very good consistent main, and the overall movement option the game is going to be providing is going to be very nice. And the other kind of like going through more of the shooters, there was basically K52. I didn't get to actually see too many K52s. It's kind of a strong choice, but it might actually be on the more of the good alternative, considering that like it's still a 52, so of course it's going to be good because it has wall accessibility to it. But also the special itself, it's incredibly good. The fact that it gives you a kind of like missile type of effect against the enemy team or like enemy players, basically forcing them to move when you start approaching them. It's a very good tool in order to actually like force them out of a comfortable position or like follow up your shots. It's very, very good, and it's hard to justify not having like maybe one, and it might actually be a meta defining special if people actually realize the potential this has. And I believe it has a high amount of potential, because missiles may not end up as good due to some changes that it has to it. that I will be bringing up in a bit. There's not much else to say than, like, there's no main power-up for the weapon, but it still feels very good to actually play the weapon, so it's very effective. The other shooter is probably going to be, like, Junior is probably going to be, like, if the bubbler is going to be a good choice, then this belongs in the, like, good alternative. Like, it has the potential, like, there's not many, like, the spike bomb weapons in the game, and that's going to be, like, coming out, so it might actually be here. The issue is that, like, it's a big bubbler on a standard range weapon, or kind of like a short range, so it's kind of a niche pick. But if big bubbler ends up actually being really effective in, like, some of the modes, and it might end up actually being like a good alternative instead of just being a niche pick. Like, you can maybe put it on the zone, or maybe somewhere else. So, assuming it might actually be an effective special, it might be a good alternative, but if it doesn't turn out, it's just gonna be like a niche pick. So I'm gonna be going by the length of saying that it's good enough, but not really like incredible as a weapon. So the other shooter is basically the splatter shot. I feel like the weapon itself is like the special is good. Like, I want to say that it's a good alternative, because it's one of those weapons that might actually be working pretty well with the crab and being one of those rare mid-range weapons. There's going to be a lot of mid-range weapons, as well as, like, even backliner weapons or some other weapons that don't have to be mid-range. So it kind of ends up being here. The marker itself is very precise in how you want to use it, so it ended up being, when I tested it out, that it's nice. But it's not exactly the most amazing thing there is. But it's not really bad. I can't say the weapon is bad. The main weapon is actually good. I think that's the case for how the weapon itself actually works. And I think it's actually good. And it's a strange thing that, like, the crab, yeah. The crab itself functions pretty alright. The crab itself doesn't really, like, it has kind of a weird hitbox on the front. Sometimes, like, you're able to not get hit by the opponent, and sometimes you get, like, one shot or just damaged by the front. It soaks up a pretty good amount of damage, but it's vulnerable from the back. The damage it has is pretty okay. It's like it has a lot of presence in fights when you actually use the explosions and other things that it has. I don't think it's bad, but I think the weapon just needs a lot more testing in a proper environment to see, like, how good of a potential it has. Because currently it seems like it has kind of a weird state that if it ends up being pretty okay, then it's a good alternative. But currently it's just kind of niche. What else from the shooters? I don't exactly remember, so I think that's mostly of the shooters, and it could be just like I'm going to go through all the potential kits that have been found out, what they have. So let's go. Rapid Blaster has a Ink Mine and Triple Ink Strike. Triple Ink Strike itself was found to be kind of like just kind of mediocre. It was like okay. So this might actually just end up being a niche or just a somewhat weak pick, because there's likely going to be better Triple Ink Strike kits than just the Rapid Blaster, because it doesn't really have a bomb to it. It just has Ink Mine, so it doesn't really work that well. Triple Ink Strike is just going to be better with, like, something else, on top of it being like a 200 point hit points to it. Rapid Blaster Pro might end up being like a niche pick, because, well, it's a long-range Rapid Blaster, so it's a good one already, and it has Toxic Mist and Ink Vac to it. Toxic Mist is bad for it, but the Ink Vac, that's pretty alright to it. And it turns out that the Ink Vac has the potential to be really strong, but if the Rapid Blaster itself doesn't work that effectively, then the kit itself is going to end up being, well, underwhelming, because the Ink Vac works best if you're a aggressive kind of weapon, or you just, like, punish people for pushing up to you. So that's kind of a benefit that it has if people end up approaching you, like when you're the Rapid Blaster. You have the benefit of just punishing if they just go at you, but I feel that that's limiting the potential of what Inkvac is capable of doing by just being able to go in the aggression. But maybe it's that like it turns out to be a really good combination for the weapon by being able to, when you have the Inkvac, you're able to go into the aggression and then use that to your advantage, that you can push up with the main weapon, and then when you feel like you're in trouble, you can just change into Inkvac when you have it, and then you just punish. So there's that potential. So, Clash Blaster, Splat Bomb Trizuka. This is gonna be probably a niche weapon. The main weapon will likely just be... The kit is solid. Splat Bomb Trizuka is a solid kit. However, the main weapon, that's still an issue. It does not have the potential to be like amazing. It's just gonna be like a Clash Blaster with that. So that's an unfortunate state to it, that it's stuck with the main weapon too. Range Blaster. It has Suction Bob Wavebreaker. It's definitely a solid kit, but if Range Blaster feels kind of bad to play, it's just gonna be like a niche pick. But it might even fall into a somewhat weak state. So if it ends up being like a very good like hit range, or otherwise being able to just be really effective, then it's a good alternative. But currently it's looking like a niche pick in my opinion, because blasters weren't really in the most perfect state ever, but it still works. And the other blasters, kind of like most of these, just end up being like on this one, even like with the Big Bubbler Autobomb, it's like pretty okay. But like a Big Bubbler is just like not fit for these types of weapons, like Blaster. It just allows you to stay in one spot, but they can just kind of wait it out. Then if you try to approach and place the Big Bubbler, well, maybe they can punish you if you just don't respect the shield enough. So there's that. The second thing is the Luna Blaster. Luna Blaster has a very solid kit. I feel like it's a good alternative, but people have been getting a few kind of like comments that like the Luna Blaster kind of just sucks because the range has been nerfed or something like that. So if that's true, then it's just a niche pick. But it's looking like a very good alternative if they end up buffing the range like a very slight amount. So that's it's very simple. Like Zipcaster is a very good special for getting in, punishing, doing all that kind of stuff, but you're extremely vulnerable while using it, of course, so you have to be a little bit more wary when you actually use it. There is, of course, the other kit, which is basically the brush, like Octobrush. Octobrush is basically a kit that already kind of like, when you think about it, like which one is better than the other one, I feel like Octobrush might actually end up being pretty decent, but it depends like which one's going to be going over the other. If the other one is better than the other, then basically, like it's basically which one's the better Zipcaster. If it ends up being the Octobrush, then this one's niche, or if it's Luna, then Brush becomes like bad. Maybe they're like in equal between each other, like which one do you want to get like better kill potential, or just a sub preference, whichever you may want to actually have. Ink Brush. This is a kit that is extreme. I feel like this is extremely like it's a good alternative. It might be extremely underrated because of the special that it has, and it has the potential to basically set up its own push by setting up the Killer Whale. Then you just go in and you're able to do brush things, and they have to either get you down, or they might even die, because you have a huge amount of mobility with the Ink Brush, being able to just go in after like setting up the Killer Whale. So it's a very good weapon that I think that people need to actually be aware of, that this might be a very good kit. It has even a spot bomb to it, so it might end up being like a strong choice in the end, but it's a very specialized weapon, so it just ends up being like just a good alternative when you actually think about it. And now we actually get into the very interesting one. Gootuber. It has torpedo tandem missiles. I feel like this is just going to end up being kind of a niche or just a good alternative. I don't. It's like people are hyping this up a lot. People are hyping up like a 10 missile GoTuber. Like that sounds. It sounds good that it has missiles, but how much missiles have changed or made either good or bad? If it ends up being that they're kind of just not that good, then that just means that like the GoTuber is just not gonna be that good, and it's just gonna end up being a niche pick because there's not many missile weapons in the game. So that's mostly it's like stayed in the game. So it ends up being just kind of like, in my opinion, already a niche pick, and because there's gonna be like stronger options than the GoTuber, and other chargers are basically going to be the better alternative immediately than the GoTuber itself, because like why would you risk taking a charger that's basically a slow charging weapon and just has like worse range than most other chargers in the first place? So there's that. Yeah, I don't think like it's gonna be meta, but like if it ends up being the same state, that just it has good, like some have good like counter arguments to like, you know, better overall pain with tap shots and other stuff, which is pretty okay. But the problem is still that it, like, the main weapon itself just has like a really bad charge speed. It just does not have that good of a charge speed when you compare it to the other chargers. Like you can take like even a Splat charger or a Squiffer, or even take the benefit of like E-liter. Which doesn't seem like a very good idea in my opinion. So with all that said, I think it's just somewhat weak. Like I don't think it's just even a niche pick. It just ends up being a somewhat weak pick. I can get like, maybe it ends up being like pretty decent pick, but I don't think that it has the potential. Bamboo, Autobomb Killer Whale. It doesn't have main part up to it. It's gonna end up being just a weak pick. I don't think it has the capability of being meta, and there's gonna be better Killer Whale weapons to be used than it. The main problem with it is that it doesn't have the damage to actually do properly with it. Anyway, I'm just gonna be placing all the scoped variants on the same tier. It doesn't really matter which one do you pick in the end. They have some changes to them, so yeah, you can just pick like whatever you might actually want. Anyway, E-liter. E-liter is kind of this, like, it has the capability of being a strong choice. Actually, like, it has the capability of being a strong choice. If the meta becomes too fast for it, it's just gonna be a good alternative. But currently, how the maps are built around, backliners have a strong presence, and it also means that like chargers have a good capability of also being relevant to the meta because of these map changes that they have overall made. So most of the time they are going to be a very strong choice for your team comps to have at least one charger on your team. So if the meta becomes too fast, of course, like, all of these are just going to be like good alternatives until it just keeps on getting too fast. But currently it seems that like they're not terrible choices because the maps they have made, there's good spots for you to snipe on, good spots to actually like have a considerable presence into the game. But if the overall thing just, well, I kind of repeat the same point, but like if it becomes too fast, then these are not that good. Like they have both good kits, Wavebreaker or Ink Vac, Splat Bomb, Ink Mines. It's like both kits are really strong, and I believe that they might actually be good. Good in the meta, like strong choices. Squiffer. Squiffer has the capability of just being like a decent pick. Even though it has point sensor, it has big bubbler. I think it's a good alternative. There's not many good weapons with like the big bubbler, and it probably could be better than the Junior itself. But it's still like a point sensor. Like it's kind of a bummer it has point sensor, but it has the capability of being a good big bubbler weapon, because like a big bubbler or with a mid-range weapon is a really strong benefit, because you can actually defend the bubbler from range and you can get people to jump to it safely, because you have the capability of just sending it down there it is. You can actually get the benefit out of it. So it's one of those few big bubbler weapons that I feel like people should be actually taking note of. So then we get to the more of the dualies. So the first dualie I want to actually mention is the Tetris. Tetris was actually like it's a very strong choice. It's a very strong choice because it has the capability of having a good presence because of its special. Wrist slider is so dumb. It's so fast. It forces the enemies to immediately get out of the way because like they don't want to be taking the risk of just staying in its way because like it just activates very fast. You can't disrespect it at all. It's going to be a very strong. Splat dualies. They might either end up being like they're just a niche pick. It's one of those like it has the crab, but it's just gonna be a niche pick. It's like these two are like on an unfortunate state due to that, and yeah. Even in like the Testfire, they just ended up being kind of like this spot of like just being like an awkward kid of like suction bomb crab tank. Yeah, it's like it really depends like if you're gonna be like even a good player with it, but they might even just be a weak kid because the main weapon just doesn't work that well for it. Like Tetris is already looking better than this kid, so pick your poison basically. Dualie sculptures. It's basically if they did not change this weapon, it's just going to be like just a niche pick. Its kit is really good. Sweat Bomb Ray Breaker is a very good combination, but with no main power up, it's just going to be ending out of the same place of just being like a niche kit. But if the weapon is accurate, more accurate than before, and has a good benefits to it, it's going to be a good alternative. And I might even say that it's already looks like a good alternative. But I emphasize that if it doesn't have a good enough combat capability, it's just going to be a niche. But it's looking very good. It's looking very good. Glulga's got the benefit of just stealing K52's kit of like splash wall booyah bomb, so it has the capability of being a good alternative, but with the lack of pain, it might end up being just kind of like a skill-oriented weapon. So it just ends up either being a niche pick or just like, there's not many booyah bomb weapons, so you can actually justify its usage a little bit. Dualies, Squid Beacon and Tacticular just makes it like it's a niche pick. If there's good enough reasons to pick Squid Beacon weapon with also a Tacticular, yeah, you can pick this. But it's a dualie, so why would you use it when it's like it's a dualie? It has too low of range to actually be a supportive weapon, and also like you have like Zap there to actually like be saying to this weapon that like, hey, why do you exist? It's just there to be like a nuisance. It might either just be a weak weapon because it doesn't have the same kind of like good capabilities to it, so it just ends up being kind of like just bad. I don't see if there's a very rare case that it might actually end up being like a very good kit because it has the option to actually being like a very good like kit. Like certain maps don't really feel like they need the use of like Squid Bacon, but like there's a couple of maps that might get the use of this, and because it has that tactical thing to it, it might end up being okay, but like I don't expect it to be that amazing compared to like most other weapons, especially when there's already like even one more tactical weapon that is going to end up being better than it. So, Carbon got the treatment of getting a really good special to it of Zipcaster, but it has Auto Bomb. So it's somewhat weak. It is definitely somewhat weak. It has the benefit of Zipcaster, but why would you want to use it when it has a sub that just doesn't really help it that much? On top of that, it just doesn't have main power from the first game, so it just ends up being somewhat weak. It has a nice combination, but again, you're going against like the Brush and the Luna in terms of like what kind of a Zipcaster weapon you want to be using, because there's straight up better choices for that use. Dynamo Roller, it's gonna be Sprinkler Tactical Area, same thing as that. It's a good alternative already because it's a dynamo that has a good use to it. It can spam paint a little bit in bursts, as well as like not requiring the use of like main power up. It's a little questionable. Like is it going to be still usable despite that loss of like main power upgrade? But it could be like potentially pretty decent despite that. So, Blingza. It has tender missiles. It's already going to be something that you have to be wary of. It's a good alternative, but if it's going to be so dumb with its spamming, it's a great strong choice. Like depending like how missiles get used and how they change overall, it's going to affect it. The tracking on it is worse. The missiles actually like come at longer delays between each other, so it may end up it ends up like lingering on the opponent's like initial spot a little bit longer, so they can't really return to an area as early enough. So it has the potential of maybe being a strong choice depending on like how they get used. Maybe like during like TC checkpoints, or how to like force enemies to just like not get into the area when you're actually pushing and such. But it has Igmites. So it doesn't really have a sub that can actually throw like a sub, so it's just like spamming paint with the main weapon, so that's basically its niche. Yeah, that's it. Okay, so Roller. So wait, kid. I have nothing else to... It has the perfect sub combination to it, like with the main. It has a perfect sub to it, that it can keep up its pressure. But the special, it's not meant for it. It's just not meant for it. I don't understand, like, they had the choice of like maybe even giving like a reef slider to make it like extremely effective and like being like this like roller that just like can a curling bomb, or even like reef slider to mix up, or even just pressure the opponent. But it might have been too big of a menace against like bad players, so it just ends up being that. So next up, this may come as a surprise, but this weapon is too clunky. The Splatana is way too clunky. It felt too weird to actually be using the Splatana itself. It felt skill oriented, but even then, when you it felt that even if you put more time to the weapon, it's basically not that good. It felt too clunky. It doesn't have some of the uses that rollers or brushes have, so it just ends up being too weak to use properly enough. So I wouldn't really recommend it too much in normal use. So that's one of my main gripes with the entire weapon itself. So I can't really recommend it unless they buff its like use or like frame data or something like that, because it doesn't really have like even if you might want a stamp weapon, there's gonna be other stamp weapons that you can use. Even Splush itself is just gonna be like with a stamp, as you might have seen like from all the teasers. It's gonna be having like a stamp, so it's outright better than it. Yeah, so yeah, that's also something that I can already place here. It's gonna be a niche pick. It's Splush. It has a terrible range, but it's still like better than this thing by a mile. Even better than these two. So also this might actually end up being like somewhat weak because it's still a Splush, but I'm giving the benefit of the doubt that it might actually be okay. Actually, yeah, it depends like how it might end up being. So you can actually bundle it with these or here. So yeah, you can actually have that kind of thing. Now, however, the other Splatoon stamper. This has the potential of being a very good alternative if it's not as terrible as the other one, because it seems to have better damage than the other one, which makes it pretty interesting, as well as a burst bomb on top of that. It's a good combo tool. If it's not as terrible to use as the other one, because it has the burst bomb to help with combos and other things, it's a very good alternative. Also, it has Zipcaster, so yeah, you can just Zipcaster and then just like slash someone and yeah, they're dead. So it has the potential to be a good alternative. If not, then it's just going to be a niche pick at best, and this might actually have the potential to be a pretty decent one. but it still ends up being a big question, like how clunky it feels to play. If it's too clunky, then it's a niche or even a weak pick, because that is the main question with this weapon entirely, in order to actually see if the Splatoon is going to be a good or bad weapon. So next up is Undercover Umbrella. It's undercover. It's already a weak one. I don't think it's you could argue that it's an outclassed weapon, but I just think it's weak. Reef Slider is spammable. It's just so dumb. Maybe they might have actually buffed its shield to be a little bit better than the other, like on the previous one. But it still makes you question, like, or like maybe made its like damage a little bit more consistent instead of being like this really terrible damage output to it. So I hope that they buffed it. If it ends up being buffed, maybe it's a niche pick. But I don't think like it's gonna be a good alternative across the many other weapons, unless it actually has been buffed a little bit better. That like its consistency with hitting people with the full damages of Lum are better. People are saying, okay, so next up is like Tent. It's a strong choice. People and at the same time, I'm not sure if this is a strong choice, but it's looking like a good alternative. People have been saying that the Tent is already a really good kit. Squid Beacon and Inkvac is an extremely good combination with the weapon, and the other kit is like kind of meh with like the sprinkler being on it, but it's like the Inkstruck is like actually pretty alright for it, so it might end up being actually like a really good kit to it, because like it's just really like people have been saying like the actual damage that it does is a little bit more consistent compared to like Splatoon 2, so it feels a lot more comfortable for them to deal with, that it doesn't feel that as inconsistent as around the other one. So we'll see how it actually ends up going. Aerospray, this is actually a surprising niche pick. If the Reef Slider spam ends up being a very effective strategy, this might actually be a good alternative. If like special spam strategies will still be an effective way to actually play the game, so yeah, you will still end up actually seeing those being used. So this is still a niche pick. It's not a weak pick by far. Reef Slider is so dumb. While like the DC Bomb might actually be like kind of a meme to it, that like it doesn't feel like it's too good, but it's still fizzy. Like you can still spam it a little bit. Maybe it's like useful for like zones or some other use to it. So it could be a pretty okay kit, but it feels like it's just kind of weird to actually recommend that kit to most people or like most modes. So there's that. Squeezer. It has Splash Wall and Pryzuka. It just seems like it's just gonna be like, because it's a Squeezer, it has the benefit of the main weapon, but it has been nerfed and it's just gonna be a niche pick. But it still seems that it has a good alternative to it, that it's basically like, it doesn't have the same single best kit to it, because it's like Splash Wall Pryzuka. So at least you don't have to break your hands, but it's there for you to actually choose if you want to actually use it. 96. I don't actually know what to say about it main weapon wise, but it has the potential to be at least a good alternative, especially when it has the capability with like Inkvac attached to it. But Sprinkler again, yeah, it ends up being like a big question. If it's just not that good, it may either stay here because the Inkvac is really good, but it might actually end up being a dish pick. But it seems like a good alternative. And then on the other spectrum, I don't think the Jet Squelcher is going to be that good, because it has Inkvac to it. It's still going to be a jet, so it has the capability of at least being a good long range. But at the same time, you look at like other good potential long range weapons like Chargers. Chargers are going to be very busted from the get-go. So there's that. But at the same time, you might be like questioning again, like maybe like you can just like spam the Inkvac and then just like punish if they try to approach you if you just play like an aggressive Jet Squelcher. So there's that. But again, Yeah, we'll see like how it actually gets played, like in an aggressive way or something else. So, yeah. Then we have the Splashmatic. This was actually looking like a pretty interesting kit with Burst Bomb and the Zipcaster, but they changed it to Burst Bomb Crab Tank. I feel like this is going to be a strong choice. But if Crab ends up being just like kind of meh, it's just a good alternative. And I'm already assuming that it's just going to be a strong pick. People are saying that you don't really have to pick this one at all, but I feel like people are just underestimating how good this might actually become, because Burst Bomb, Splash-O-Matic is just a really good combination, and whatever method you might actually have to it is just going to be a really good combination. Especially with like Crab Tank and no requirement for the Intensify action for this. It's going to be a very good alternative, in my opinion. I don't think that it's not going to be terrible. It's going to be a very good pick regardless of what it might actually end up being. People are just underestimating how good it might be. But if they're right, it's just going to be a good alternative. It's definitely not terrible. I think that it's going to be a very good weapon. Now, we actually have the H3 Nuzzle Nose. H3 got the benefit of having Tacticooler. Great! Except that it got Point Sensor. Point Sensor is terrible for it, and it ends up being on the niche side. Because it got the worst sub it could possibly get on a very good special. If it got any other sub weapon that like maybe like a bomb or something else, it could have been like even on the strong choice, but because it has Point Sensor, it's just a niche pick. It's just a niche pick, and also the same thing of like you can't even use like your space to actually like have like something else to it. It just ends up being kind of like too clunky of a kit. L3 is just gonna be on the niche side too. It's like, but if the main power up lost to it, because like this one has Curling Bomb Crab Tank, it's still like the same problem with like the Splattershot Pro. It ends up being like, if it ends up being better than the Splattershot Pro itself, it ends up being like in the same spot still, despite that, because like it's still like you lose your damage to the weapon that you can't really like triple burst, like a single shot burst people that know easily. So or like at all basically, because you don't have main power up at all. So it's being kind of this like too weak of a thing. So I don't exactly recommend and trying it out too much. Maybe it might end up being decent enough, but maybe it ends up being like kind of this like underwhelming kit. So next one, Bloblobber. So Bloblobber itself is just going to be like this kind of like kit that's being seen as with Sprinkler and Inkstorm. Sprinkler and Inkstorm is just going to be a kit that's like this kind of like it's just gonna be like a niche pick. I don't think like Bloblobber is just gonna be a good alternative amongst like all the other like backliners and other things. It's too weird to play, but except it's a good kit, so it works. Tri-Slosher might be this kind of like a good alternative because like it's one of the few inkjet weapons in the game, so that's one of the reasons that it gets played. Maybe as like a Rainmaker variant because it has Toxic Mist, but it feels kind of weird to actually play. But it's still a Tri-Slosher, so maybe it might end up being rather dumb. Now people are expecting the sloshing machine to end up being like a very strong choice because of its like Fizzy Bomb, Booyah Bomb combination, but the combination feels really clunky to me. So I think like it's just gonna end up being like a good alternative because like it's still the main and sub is really good. But the specialist kind of like this makes you question like, do I really want this? So yeah, it ends up being like that. Okay. Yeah, it's very hard to really make any kind of like too descriptive like notions of these. So yeah. So the next slosher is of course the regular one. This needs more play to actually see the slosher actually being played more. The kit is insane. Splat Bomb, Tri-Strike is so good. But if Tri-Strike ends up being tested more, played around more, then it might just end up being a good alternative. And most of the other Tri weapons are just not gonna be like good. So that's one of its possible fates as a weapon, so it ends up being just not that fantastic of a weapon. So next up is like Explosher. Point Sensor Inkstorm. It's still an Explosher, so people might end up actually using it because it's an Explosher. But they like special choice. I think it's better than like what it has the main of like Bubble Blower that was on like Splatoon 2, but it's still not the same as Baller for its like defensive measures. But it has such a strong presence of actually dealing like with the zone and maybe dealing chip damage or other stuff. So it has the potential just being like okay or like a decent choice. I don't think it's just gonna be like becoming a niche pick because it's an Explosher, of course. But if the maps don't go into its favor, like it doesn't have the enough like angles to actually get it a good enough advantage, if it doesn't like have enough of a presence in most maps, it's just gonna end up being a niche pick. But it has the capability of being a good alternative. Assuming like some of the maps that's gonna be coming out, like even like Wahoo, Mako, there's a few maps that it's gonna be very good on, despite like not having baller accessibility to it. So right before the Stringer, we actually have the Splatling still left. So Ballpoint. Ballpoint has this kind of like a weird spot of having like Fizzy Bomb Inkjet. The Inkjet is like really good. I think it has the capability of being a good alternative because it has Inkjet. The sub it doesn't matter. So it's kind of like this Fizzy Bomb. So it's just kind of like, what am I doing with this? It's still a bomb, so at least it's fine. But it's like, how often are you gonna use that? Maybe sometimes if you just want to get the bomb presence into the match, but like. Something like a little bit more supportive could have been like usable to it instead of that, so it's kind of the unfortunate thing. Hydra, I think the mobility is still going to be affecting it, so it's just going to be a niche pick, despite it getting like a Booyah Bomb to actually have a presence in the match. However, Heavy Splatling with its Wavebreaker is just going to be a really good alternative, but it can't really break into the strong choices because the Chargers have kind of a presence here that like if it suddenly spikes up, the Chargers are going to prevent its usage being like in this like really high spot. So maybe like Ballpoint is going to end up being used more if like Chargers have a stronger preference and you still want to use a Splatling. So there's that. Then there's the second one, or like the other one, which is like maybe Splatling got the benefit of having Burst Bomb to it. Right, nice, but it has Stamp. So it has the awkward style to it, so it looks good. It looks good, but it's still kind of like this awkward mini with an aggressive kid. So it may actually end up being a niche pick, but I don't think like it's gonna be that bad. It's just gonna be like a good alternative. So next up is Not. Not has Point Sensor Inkstorm. Terrible sub. I don't think. I think some people that are underestimating how good a bomb sub can be for Not actually means to the weapon, because you can sometimes have the presence to a fight, as well as like having Inkjet to sometimes have a good presence, because Inkstorm doesn't really benefit the weapon too much. I think it's just going to be a niche pick or even a weak pick, because like the special just doesn't complement it too much. So lastly, there's the one that is the most interesting weapon to me, which is the Stringer. The sub to it is okay. Some might say it's bad, but I think it's okay. Special, however, it's one of the best it could possibly get in order to actually keep its presence. But however, this weapon is one of the absolutely like hardest weapons to play in the entire game, because it has such a interesting or like complex use to it. So it basically like has this kind of like effect to it that you should be like, yeah, it's gonna take a lot of time to get that weapon in good use, because like this has such a complex use to it. Some people will never actually get to use this to its fullest potential, because it's so complex that it requires the right mind to bring out its greatest potential, and how much you have to actually aim well with the weapon, and how much you have to kind of like predict and also use it to its advantage, and how you have to like think about how big of a charge you have to use on the weapon to actually get its strongest effect to it. But I definitely think it has the capability of being a good alternative, at least if played well. Even has the potential of being a strong choice, despite the chargers here. But if the chargers end up being way too much to it, the weapon itself is just going to end up being just a good alternative, along with the other ones. And I definitely think that it has the capability of being like really strong choice, because it also has the range and kind of like this like explosure preference to it. So it ends up being like this kind of like a very good pick overall when you actually think about it. So looking at the full list now that it has been made, you can definitely notice that like it's still a very special oriented meta that it's going to be, but on top of that there's going to be like a very strong presence in some main weapons in the game, because like chargers weren't really that used, because like they didn't have that good of a presence in the end, because the specials were just like overwhelming them and they just couldn't be used that well. But now that the maps are like a lot more like preferential to them, they have a stronger presence in the overall meta of like being interchangeable, kind of having a better preference overall to actually have at least one charger in your team. But at the same time, some maps may not even be required to have a charger on, or maybe like charger is just still in the same spot of like not being that good, because it has this kind of like too clunky for like a super fast meta or something else. But the maps are definitely going to be the biggest like preference to them. And like speaking into speed, it's definitely going to be a rush meta, because there's going to be like a zap on the top of the list, just making everything like look incredibly rush oriented. And maybe it might make that there's going to be an interesting sort of like compositions being tried out, that maybe like even some of the niche picks might even be tried out, that like because you have the tactical, or you can just like go risk free of like maybe just going for like range blaster or even something else that you don't have to lose your special as often. So we might end up seeing like something like even like range blaster or zap, because like they have the capability of like combining each other, and you just have like insane accuracy with the weapon after that. So that's mostly the biggest thing that you might actually want to think about, like maybe having the zap in combination with the range blaster or some other weapons too, to actually increase the range and other like things to it. But definitely it's going to be like a meta around tacticaler and the very basic presence of like maybe like zap, one backline, the two fillers, that depend like on what else you might actually want, like just like one from the strong choice and maybe like the second from the good alternatives, or just like playing with what might come into mind, just like testing around different kinds of compositions, and what weapons might actually be good in the end. So that's mostly it. The only other things that I might actually want to comment on is like the weak weapons. I strongly hope that like the Splatoon gets buffed. It's definitely too clunky. At least a very small, like kind of like frame data buffs, or like something else that to not feel as weird of a thing to play. But it might also affect the other Splatoon if it just ends up being just kind of like weird to play. So I hope that Nintendo takes a look at the overall play testing data and just like buff stuff appropriately, and just also adjusts other weapons too. Yeah. So anyway, that's it.